This Filmmaker IQ lesson is sponsored by ikan, award-winning designer, manufacturer, and distributor of professional video, film, and broadcast production equipment. And by Blackmagicdesign, creating the world's highest quality solutions for feature film, post-production, and television broadcast industries. Hi, welcome to Filmmaker IQ. I'm John Hess, and we're going to be looking at the basic concepts behind composition and how it relates to aspect ratio. Odds are if you're watching this video, you're most likely working in some form of digital video. And as we learned in the history lesson on aspect ratio, almost all digital video products use the 16:9 aspect ratio. But 16:9 isn't really classically cinematic, especially now that HD is the norm. Or maybe you want to get that CinemaScope 2.35 look. But when you're on set, your camera's viewfinder is going to give you plain old 16:9. How can we get an approximation of what your final aspect ratio will look like? Well, this is when an external monitor can be very helpful. Advanced models like the beautiful ikan MD7 have a built-in software preset that shows you where you would crop for a 4:3, 16:9, 1.85, and 2.35 image, as well as a custom setting which allows you to create any aspect ratio that you want. Now, if you don't have a monitor with advanced capabilities, you can always use gaffer's tape to cover over your monitor to create the desired aspect ratio. Now, you can use a ruler or just do it by feel. Now, this isn't necessarily as precise, and you should be careful not to ruin your screen with the adhesive from the back of the tape. Now, once the footage is captured and in your computer, you can use letterbox masks to create the final desired aspect ratio. To figure out the size of the letterboxes themselves, we need to use a little bit of basic math. So let's say you want a 2.35 aspect ratio for my 1920 by 1080 HD video frame. You simply divide 1920 by 2.35, which gives us 817. So your final image is going to be 1920 pixels wide by 817 pixels high. Subtract 817 from 1080 and you get 263. Divide that by 2 and you get 131.5. So you should have a letterbox of 131 pixels at the top, and we'll add that extra half pixel at the bottom, at 132 pixel bar at the bottom. Now, are we going to break out the rulers and measure to make sure you have exactly an aspect ratio of 2.35, or check that you use 2.35 and not 2.39? No, come on. If you're heading to a film out, check with your vendors, make sure you're all clean. But if you're going to the web or you're going to a Blu-ray or a DVD, don't get hung up on the minutia. But to make it a little bit easier, we're going to provide a bunch of common frame masks in the lesson link below for you to download and apply to your footage to get that widescreen aspect ratio look that you want. Now that we've visualized our final aspect ratio we want to use, let's talk about how to actually compose a subject matter in that frame. Now, we could use a center frame composition, and many directors from Stanley Kubrick to Wes Anderson have built strong visual styles with a center composition. But the center composition can be a little bit too powerful, and you may want to create a shot that is not so strong by placing the subject matter off-center. To figure out how far off-center, let's look at a subject that has fascinated humankind since the ancient Greeks, the golden ratio. First recorded by the Greek mathematician Euclid, the golden ratio is a ratio between two lengths where the ratio of the sum of those two lengths to the part is the same as the ratio between the two parts. So this self-repeating ratio shows up over and over again in geometry and in nature, and is considered by the ancients to not only be aesthetically pleasing, but spiritually important. So how do we apply the golden ratio to our image? Well, often a shape called the Fibonacci spiral is overlaid on the image. Now, since the golden ratio is 1.618, which doesn't match up with any aspect ratio, we can let the top and the bottom of that spiral fall off the screen. Now, by placing our subject on those lines, we can create a traditionally pleasing shot. But let's get real here. No one is expecting you to get out a compass and draw spirals on your monitor, though you can use the ikan MD7's custom markers to set lines where that golden ratio line would be. But a much more practical approach is the rule of thirds. Imagine dividing the screen into 3 parts, both horizontally and vertically. Now position your subject on one of the third lines, and then just adjust the shot to something that you find appealing. Now this will actually get you pretty close to where that golden ratio would be. Again, no one is going to get out a ruler and measure your composition to see if you're exactly on the golden ratio or the third line. Just get it where you like it. After all, we're making movies for human beings to watch, not robots. Now, speaking of human beings, let's talk briefly about how to frame up a face. If you look at a human head, all the emotional expressions come from right above the eyebrow to right below the chin. I've never seen an actor who does his best work using the top of his head. Just doesn't happen. So when you frame a shot, keep this emotive rectangle of the face and place it inside your thirds as much as possible. And as you get closer for a close-up shot, let the top of the head fall out of frame. After all, it's not nearly as interesting as what's going on between the eyebrows and the chin. Martin Scorsese once famously asked, "How do you frame a close-up in widescreen?" Well, this was a common criticism when widescreen first became popular. The beauty of the 4:3 Academy ratio is how it beautifully fits a human face. 16:9 and 1.85 are still relatively conducive to the close-up, but once you start getting into a 2.35 and above range, there's a lot of wasted screen real estate in a full-face close-up. Now, sometimes you'll want that emptiness, but sometimes you may want to use a technique of crafting your own specialized spaces inside the frame. The traditional word for this is mise en scène, literally placing on stage. By carefully composing your shot with a mix of foreground and background objects, you can create really interesting cinematic compositions. And the most basic example is in shooting a face-to-face, two-person, over-the-shoulder dialogue scene. Here, we use the back of the other actor's head to reduce the size of the space which we're going to use to frame the actor speaking. Even though we're shooting with a 2.35 aspect ratio, the area of interest here is significantly smaller because we've filled up the space with the other actor's head. This technique of including unwanted elements in a shot is sometimes called dirtying up the frame. You can use architectural elements to do the same thing. Here, using walls to create natural borders in the frame. In this shot, the pillar is a foreground element. In this reverse shot, the pillar is still serving the same purpose, cutting down our frame, but now it's in the background. Now, we're using the front door window and the pillar to create this box inside our widescreen 2.35 aspect ratio. Let's demo this same technique of using doors in a Godfather-inspired sequence and pay special attention to the wall and the shoulders in the upcoming shots. This mise-en-scene approach to composition is really made possible by the widescreen aspect ratios. Now, Orson Welles started this trend in Citizen Kane with his unique blocking, but it became much easier for filmmakers when they had a wider canvas to work with. Generally speaking, the wider your screen, the more you should incorporate mise-en-scene in your compositions and rely less on montage or cutting. Or don't do that. Do the opposite. It's up to you. Just as with every choice in filmmaking, the choice of which aspect ratio you use and how you compose your shots all demand compromise. Be aware of your options. Experiment. Learn how these things affect your storytelling, and then make a choice. Make something great. I'm John Hess. I'll see you at filmmakeriq.com.